The public is conditioned to watch the skies for missiles. This is a strategic misdirection. The kinetic cost of a missile launch creates a clear line of attribution and invites immediate, overwhelming retaliation. It is a primitive tool. The primary vector for state-level conflict in the 21st century is not a ballistic trajectory. It is silence. The first strike will not be an explosion. It will be the severing of the enemy's nervous system. 99% of all intercontinental data traffic, the lifeblood of finance, logistics, and command and control, travels through a few hundred fiber optic cables on the ocean floor. These are unprotected, publicly mapped, and represent the ultimate asymmetric vulnerability. Simultaneously, the attack targets the state's eyes. Reports from CSIS and RUSI confirm the deployment of ground-based laser systems capable of permanently dazzling or destroying low Earth orbit imaging and communication satellites. It is not science fiction. It is operational hardware. GPS, military communications, and strategic intelligence are rendered inert without a single kinetic impact. The result is a new strategic entity, the Blind Leviathan. A nation-state possessing immense kinetic power, carrier groups, armored divisions, a nuclear triad that is suddenly isolated. It cannot process global financial transactions, triggering an immediate solvency crisis. It cannot communicate with its deployed assets. It cannot see an adversary's movements. It is a giant, paralyzed by sensory deprivation. This state of engineered paralysis short-circuits the escalation ladder. A nation facing systemic economic collapse and strategic blindness cannot respond conventionally. It operates under the assumption of a worst-case scenario. Its launch-on-warning protocols are triggered, but its warning systems are dead. The mathematical certainty is this: when a nuclear-armed power is made blind and cornered, its final strategic option is not surrender. The invasion was not a geopolitical gambit. It was a solvency event. The motive is rooted in a fundamental miscalculation by Western strategists. They viewed Russia's systemic weakness as a deterrent. It was, in fact, the primary accelerant. When a state's balance sheet is collapsing and its primary liabilities are domestic, it cannot afford inaction. It is forced to reprice its assets on the global stage through the only mechanism it has left: kinetic force. Analysts at RUSI identify the core liability not as NATO expansion, but as Russia's own demographic winter and unsustainable economic model. The war itself becomes a tool to manage this internal decay, a state-sanctioned liability transfer. By initiating an external conflict, the regime converts a slow, politically untenable domestic collapse into an acute, unifying national crisis. An unpopular war is a lesser political liability than a generation facing systemic poverty and national irrelevance. This is the pivot to asymmetry. Faced with overwhelming economic and conventional inferiority, the state has no choice but to change the battlefield. The adversary's strength, a complex, interconnected global economy, becomes the primary target vector. Russia did not need to win a conventional war. It only needed to survive long enough to weaponize energy, grain, and fertilizer. It engineered a global supply chain crisis to counter a national solvency crisis. The math is irrefutable. Conventional leverage was already gone. Economic leverage was under direct attack via sanctions. Stripped of these options, the state was forced up the escalation ladder. This isn't a political choice. It is a protocol dictated by insolvency. The playbook is now public. Weaponize the systemic dependencies you control when your own systemic viability is threatened. This is the predictable response when a nuclear-armed power is pushed toward financial checkmate. The core of asymmetric conflict is not ideology. It is arbitrage. The math is irrefutable. A peer-state competitor fields a $5 million main battle tank, a monument to industrial-era power. The challenger fields a $500 commercial drone with an explosive payload. This is not a fair fight. It is a mathematical liquidation of a high-value asset by a low-cost threat. Analysis from the Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, confirms this is the new baseline for kinetic cost. The ratio is approximately 10,000 to 1. For every dollar of offensive capability, the legacy power must bear $10,000 of defensive liability. This economic imbalance is unsustainable. It guarantees that any conventional force will be attrited into insolvency before the first major battle is won. This vector is known as the democratization of violence. Lethality, once the exclusive domain of the nation-state with its billion-dollar budgets, is now commoditized. It is available to any actor, state, proxy, or private, with access to global supply chains. The ability to neutralize strategic assets is no longer determined by GDP or industrial capacity, but by tactical innovation and a willingness to exploit the cost differential. This is the blueprint for how a systemic economic attack translates into physical, kinetic defeat. The next global conflict will not be declared. It is being beta-tested in what intelligence circles call gray zones, nations designated as proxy laboratories for systemic stress. Reports from strategic bodies like CSIS and RUSI flag escalating instability in places like South Africa or Canada, not as the central conflict, but as firewalled environments to refine the playbook. The objective is to measure the precise dosage of economic pressure required to fracture a society before a full-scale deployment against a primary adversary. The blueprints are already field-proven. The orchestrated collapse of Venezuela, a nation once buoyant with oil wealth, was the successful test of single-point-of-failure economics, source Darva2. The sustained capital flight from California, placing it dead last on the U-Haul Growth Index for 6 straight years, is not a domestic issue. It is a proof of concept for using policy to engineer a solvency crisis at a sub-national level, source number 4. Each is a tested module, ready for integration. These gray zones are where the weapons are calibrated. Weaponized supply chains are the new artillery, demonstrated when China banned rare earth exports to Japan over a political spat, establishing a direct link between resources and statecraft, source Nusk 1. Pre-existing vulnerabilities, like Uzbekistan's water crisis, are identified by adversaries and leveraged as attack vectors to dictate energy policy and enforce dependency, source number 3. This is not wargaming. It is live-fire rehearsal for inflicting a national-level liquidity event. Strategic solvency is not just economic, it dictates military protocol. According to analysts at CSIS, the launch-on-warning doctrine is a state's codified response to a perceived existential attack. It is not retaliation. It is preemption based on data from early warning systems. The protocol is designed to launch a full-scale nuclear counterstrike the instant an adversary's launch is detected, before their warheads can impact and neutralize command and control. This entire protocol is the ultimate single point of failure. Its integrity rests entirely on the sanctity of data. Adversaries understand this. The primary vector for a decapitation strike is no longer kinetic. It is digital. A sophisticated cyber attack that blinds radar, spoofs satellite signals, or creates ghost launches introduces the fog of digital war. In this scenario, the commander is systemically cornered. The data is compromised, but the protocol is absolute. Waiting for confirmation could mean total annihilation if the attack is real. Launching could initiate global catastrophe if the attack is a ghost. Fear becomes the deciding variable. This is the endgame of asymmetric warfare, forcing a nuclear-armed opponent, already weakened by economic attrition, to make an impossible choice based on manufactured doubt. The math is not emotional. It is a calculated protocol designed to force a launch decision under duress. The adversary's first move will not be a missile. It will be an algorithm. The objective is not territory. It is solvency. We have entered an era of undeclared economic warfare where the primary weapon is the engineered failure of critical systems. The opening salvo will be a calibration shot, a deliberately limited, non-kinetic strike designed to measure response protocols and economic pain tolerance with perfect deniability. The target vector is pre-selected. For 6 consecutive years, U-Haul data confirms California registers the highest net outflow of migration in the nation. This is not a demographic trend. It is a policy-driven capital flight, creating a systemic liability. As documented by RUSI, a state hollowed out from within becomes a low-resistance target. The math is irrefutable. A diminished tax base and eroding infrastructure create the ideal conditions for a systemic shock. The blueprint for this attack is public record. When China banned rare earth exports to Japan, it established the doctrine, supply chains are a weapon system. According to CSIS analysis, this move from commercial leverage to strategic coercion is now standard protocol. It proved that economic interdependencies are not a buffer against conflict. They are the battlefield itself. This is the established escalation ladder. Therefore, the calibration shot must maximize economic disruption while maintaining zero attribution. Within the next 12 months, anticipate a multi-day, cascading power failure targeting the port complex of Los Angeles and Long Beach. It will be publicly attributed to aging infrastructure or an anomalous solar event. Its true purpose will be to test the fragility of the U.S. supply chain under asymmetric pressure, a quiet signal preceding a potential solvency crisis.